Radiant and Resilient is about mindset and faith to break paradigms and overcome challenges in our life. Because when the mind, body, and spirit are aligned, we literally radiate from the inside out. I'm Kay Vasquez. Let's dive in. There were moments in my life where I was addicted to caffeine. The first time I became addicted to caffeine was in my 20s. I was experiencing so many migraines a couple times a week, and I started drinking coffee because I realized that it would help to dilate the blood vessels and help reduce the amount of migraines that I was experiencing. However, it didn't really completely get it away. In fact, I found myself taking Excedrin for tension headaches, which had caffeine. That's how I put the connection two and two together. When I would take that, I would notice a relief in having a migraine when one would come on. So I started drinking coffee thinking, okay, I'm being preventative. I'm just drinking coffee for that extra little bit of caffeine. And it also helped give me some energy at the time. But I didn't realize how addicted I was. In fact, by the time I went through physician assistant school, got a job, I was drinking anywhere from 1 to 2 cups of coffee per day. And I weaned back once I started working to 1 per day because at that point, I needed the caffeine. Like if I were to stop cold turkey, that would also bring on a migraine. So I became addicted, needed it every single day. And I actually also was relying on a source of energy because I remember on the days that I was off, I would need to take a nap in the middle of the day, in the afternoon. And so I would start my morning with a cup of coffee, one to prevent migraines, also give me that little boost in energy. And then I remember one day I was working at the urgent care and I was having sharp chest pains, like on the left side of my chest, and it would make me catch my breath. I knew I wasn't having a heart attack because one, I'm in my 20s, and I just intuitively felt like it was heartburn or acid reflux, whatever you want to call it, from the caffeine. So what I did next was I weaned myself off the coffee, because coffee is very acidic. And at the same time, I was also a part of an MLM. It was my sister's in-law's company. She had started a plant-based company with plant-based protein and an energy drink that had a natural source of caffeine from green tea. So I weaned myself off of coffee onto this natural source of caffeine, which was like a pre-workout at the time that we used, but that would still give me the energy. I still was able to have a little bit of that caffeine to keep the migraines at bay. And I never had that sharp pain again because it was happening a couple times a week until I realized it was probably the coffee contributing to it. And so when I weaned myself off, I felt so much better. But then the company ended up being sold, and we no longer had access to this caffeine pre-workout product. So I had to wean myself off at that time, and it became really apparent because at that time I was also in functional medicine, so I was doing a lot of work on supporting my energy, getting to the root cause of the migraines. I weaned myself off of the caffeine, which was really hard and difficult to do. But as an entrepreneur, there were times when I was actively like creating and showing up and putting myself out there when I started to feel overwhelmed. I felt overwhelmed. I was focused on fear and just wondering like what I'm creating, is that going to be good enough? And I started to feel a lot of that tension come back. I started to drop, my energy level started to drop, and I found myself resorting to caffeine because when I was in that overwhelmed state, it was hard for me to create. It was hard for me to show up. So I found myself relying on caffeine again, in the form of something called Fit-Aid, which is a cleaner energy drink, way better than Red Bull. It has a lot of vitamins and minerals. Again, caffeine from green tea extract. So yeah, the ingredients were cleaner, the flavors were more natural. So I felt okay to drink it at the time. And it did help relieve the tension that I felt in my body, and also prevent a migraine at the time. However, I noticed that I started to become more and more dependent on it. Instead of drinking it once in a while, like once every couple of weeks, it became once a week. To then it became 2 to 3 times a week, and eventually it became almost every single day. And I'm so grateful for my husband because he called me out. He's like, "You need to do the inner work. You don't need the caffeine." And at the time, of course, I didn't want to hear it, but I knew it was true. So if you haven't listened to my triggers episode, you should definitely go back. It's episode 3, all around triggers, because I definitely was triggered by that. Because at the end of the day, I knew he was right. I knew that, yeah, this addiction to caffeine was deeply rooted. There was something deeper going on within me. And that's because I was feeling overwhelmed. I was feeling overwhelmed. I didn't know how to process and release what I was feeling in my body. I didn't know where it was coming from and how to navigate that, how to move out of that state of overwhelm, of fight or flight, back into a sympathetic state where, yeah, now I had the energy to create, I had the energy to show up, and feel just calm and peace in my body. And so I see this a lot in the clients that I've worked with. We all have our form of addiction, whether it's caffeine, sometimes it's food, it could even just be scrolling on social media. Any type of addiction is really a defense mechanism. So when it comes to the state of our nervous system, if we go into fight or flight, we go into a stress response type. And there's 4 different stress response types. There's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Addiction is the flight response. The reason why we go into that flight response, we find something that we become addicted to help us feel better in the moment. Because a lot of times people think of addiction as like, yeah, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, but that's not the only addiction. Sometimes it's shopping. Sometimes it's actually working a lot to avoid what we're feeling deep down inside. This these emotions that are uncomfortable to feel. And at the time, in those moments when I found myself addicted to the caffeine, I was feeling so overwhelmed. It was so uncomfortable to feel it was manifesting physically in my body as tightness and tension and going into a migraine and as well as fatigue that I was looking for something outside of me to help me feel better in that moment. And that was caffeine. Because I'm like, okay, if I can just feel better in a moment, I can keep pushing forward. I can show up, I can create, I can do this thing and get this thing done. And it wasn't serving me. It wasn't serving. It was just continuing to put a band-aid, a mask on the problem, the deeper root of what was really going on within me. Because the overwhelm that I was experiencing was the pressure that I was putting on myself. And the defense mechanism was overcompensating for the fact that I didn't feel like I was good enough, that I wasn't worthy. So therefore, I had to do more and be more in order to feel good enough, to feel worthy. So that's how I use caffeine as a defense mechanism to give me this false sense of, yeah, feeling good in the moment so I could keep showing up when I needed to actually slow down, tune inward, and see what was really truly going on within me, that, yeah, caused this tension to build up, that caused me to, yeah, feel low energy, that triggered the migraine. So as you're listening to this episode, start thinking about some of the behaviors in your life. What are certain things that you're doing in your life? What are certain things that you are reaching for to help you feel good in the moment, to get that dopamine hit? Because in reality, you're trying to run away from feeling a certain emotion. And most of the time, it's a low vibrating emotion. Yes, it doesn't feel good when we feel it, when we're in that moment, whether it's overwhelm, frustration, worry, fear, guilt, shame. Because also, there were moments in my life where I felt guilt, I felt shame. And of course, it was not comfortable to feel that. And so the guilt and the shame led to, yeah, putting more pressure on myself, and which created more of that sense of overwhelm and therefore led me to, yeah, looking to caffeine to feel better in that moment. So Yeah, addiction can be so simple, so small. It can be something that we're not even aware that we're doing to suppress a feeling that's uncomfortable. But once we can recognize the pattern, recognize, okay, every time I feel this way, this is, what I am reaching for outside of myself to help me feel good in this moment instead of tuning inward, then we can start to shift and break that pattern. So, what is an addiction that you have in your life? And what is that emotion that you're trying to run away from, that you're trying to avoid from feeling? And once you get an idea of what that is, that's where you're going to break free and recognize that you have a choice. So next time you feel that emotion come up, like for me, it was overwhelm. Instead of reaching for the caffeine, I started to notice the pattern like, oh, I wanted to, yeah, go grab a Fit Aid. And I was like, wait a second. Why do I really need a Fit Aid? It's not because I need the energy in the moment, but maybe because I'm focusing on doing something that's not in alignment with who I am. Or maybe it's because I said yes to someone to help someone out when deep down inside, I really didn't want to because, yeah, now I'm going into people pleasing, So, what is it, that's really going on? Why you're really truly feeling the overwhelm and work through that. Work through that, make the shifts that you need to get yourself out of that feeling of overwhelm back to a state of peace and feeling calm and grounded. And if you're having trouble do that, that's what I'm here to help you to do. So reach out to me on Instagram at thekatevasquez.com. I'd love to hear from you. Share your takeaways from this episode. What is your form of addiction? What is the emotion that you're trying to run from? And if you need extra support and guidance, let me know. In the meantime, stay tuned for more episodes to come, which are launching Mondays and Thursdays as I just continue to share more insights, more knowledge, more tools, and more stories that can help you create a shift in your life so you can become radiant and resilient.